On a stormy Texas night, a solitary farmer's open door became the unlikely gateway to a covert, military secret or knock, one act of kindness, and the life forever changed. What if your simple gesture could unlock a hidden world of intrigue and heroism? Deep in the rolling plains of Montana, an aging farmer named Walter Hayes had long grown used to solitude. His days were predictable, tending his fields, mending fences, and watching the sky for signs of the next rain. But one fateful night, everything changed. A weary, mud-covered stranger arrived at Walter's doorstep, breathless and desperate. Something about the man's eyes full of exhaustion and urgency made Walter hesitate. Should he open his door to a stranger in the dead of night? 3 days later, the hum of military helicopters shattered the quiet countryside. Soldiers descended onto Walter's property, and soon, the truth was revealed. He hadn't just helped any lost traveler. He had unknowingly played a role in a classified military operation. This story is about how a simple act of kindness led to an extraordinary reward and a lesson that would resonate for years to come. If you believe that kindness should always be repaid, type help in the comments. Walter Hayes was no stranger to hard work. At 72, his days began before the sun and ended long after it disappeared behind the hills. Since his wife passed away, the farm had been his only real companion. That evening, as he finished his supper, a fierce storm rolled in. The rain battered against the windows, and lightning streaked across the sky. It was the kind of night when no one should be out on the road. Then came the knock. Karma. Slow, hesitant yet urgent. Walter frowned. No one ever visited him this late. Grabbing his lantern, he opened the door. Standing before him was a man, drenched and shivering, his clothes caked in mud. His short, military-style haircut suggested he wasn't just a traveler. "Please," the man said, voice raw, "I need shelter, just for the night." Walter studied him. Something about his posture, the way he avoided eye contact, hinted at a deeper story. He could feel the weight of the decision before him. In today's world, trust was a dangerous thing. But then he thought of his late wife, who always believed in helping others, no matter the risk. "All right," Walter said finally. "Come in." The stranger sat by the fire, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Walter poured him a cup of coffee, watching as the man drank with shaky hands. "You got a name?" Walter asked. The man hesitated. "Daniel Walker." It didn't sound like a lie, but Walter knew he wasn't getting the full story. "You from around here?" Daniel shook his head. "No, just passing through." The storm howled outside, and Walter decided to let it go. If the man needed space, he'd give it to him. "You can stay in the spare room," Walter said. "We'll talk in the morning." That night, as Walter lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into something far bigger than himself. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving the world damp and glistening. Walter expected to find Daniel gone, but instead, he found him outside, chopping wood. "You didn't have to do that," Walter said. Daniel shrugged. "You helped me. Figured I'd help back." Something about the quiet gratitude in his voice made Walter trust him at least a little. Then, as Daniel carried a load of firewood inside, Walter caught sight of something, a military insignia, tattooed on his arm. And that's when he knew. This man wasn't just passing through. He was running from something. Later that day, just as Walter was about to ask Daniel about his past, the sound of approaching vehicles caught his attention. A convoy of black SUVs sped down the dirt road, stopping just outside the farmhouse. Several men in uniform stepped out. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, approached. "We're looking for someone," he said. "A soldier missing in action." Walter's grip tightened on his coffee mug. He glanced at Daniel, whose face remained impassive. "What's he done?" Walter asked cautiously. The officer studied him. "That's classified, but it's urgent that we find him." Walter felt the weight of the moment. If he gave Daniel up, he'd never forgive himself. But if he lied, he might be putting himself in danger. After a pause, he made his choice. "Haven't seen anyone out here," he said evenly. The officer nodded, though his gaze lingered a little too long. "If you do, contact us immediately." As the SUVs pulled away, Walter turned to Daniel. "You got about 5 minutes to tell me the truth before I change my mind about helping you." Daniel exhaled. I'm not a deserter. I was on a mission. A mission that went wrong. He explained how his team had been ambushed behind enemy lines. He was the only survivor, forced to flee across hostile territory. But in the confusion, command had lost track of him. They think I went rogue, Daniel admitted. But I didn't. I didn't have a way to prove I was still alive. Walter studied him for a long time before nodding. All right, we need to figure out how to clear your name. What he didn't know was that the military already had. 2 days later, just as Walter was beginning to wonder if he'd made a mistake trusting Daniel, the sky rumbled. Military helicopters. They descended onto Walter's farm in a whirlwind of dust and noise. Soldiers spilled out, surrounding the property. But instead of arresting Daniel, they saluted him. A high-ranking officer stepped forward, shaking Daniel's hand. Welcome home, Captain Walker. Walter watched in stunned silence. Then, the officer turned to him. Mr. Hayes, your actions helped one of our own return safely. We don't take that lightly. One of the soldiers handed Walter a briefcase. This is for you. Walter frowned. I didn't help him for money. The officer smiled. Then you'll be happy to know we've set up something else instead. Inside the briefcase was a document. The Walter Hayes Veteran Assistance Fund, a program designed to help struggling veterans transition back to civilian life. Walter felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say, he murmured. Daniel stepped forward, pressing something into Walter's palm. A challenge coin engraved with Walter's name. You don't have to say anything, Daniel said. Just know that what you did mattered. 1 week later, as Walter sat on his porch, watching the sunset, he reflected on how one small choice had changed everything. A letter arrived that evening, one last message from Daniel. Sometimes, the greatest acts of heroism aren't on the battlefield. They're the quiet choices helping a stranger, standing up for what's right. You changed my life, Walter. Thank you. As Walter folded the letter, he looked up at the vast Montana sky, knowing that some actions ripple far beyond what we can see. If you believe in doing good, even when it's inconvenient, hit that subscribe button and join us at True Echoes, where real stories of kindness come to life. The dying light of the day stretched long, shifting shadows across the time-worn ranch house of Clifford Barrett. Nestled in the heart of rural Texas, the fading sun transformed the endless horizon into a canvas of rust, amber, and gold. At 72, Clifford had long grown used to the quiet solitude of his life. Every day, he rose with the roosters, crow to tend to a modest herd of cattle, and coax reluctant life from the drought-stricken soiler, land his family had nurtured for 3 generations. The only neighbor was a distant relative of sorts, living 5 miles away on a lonely, dusty stretch of road. Town visits were rare affairs, reserved solely for indispensable supplies and the occasional Sunday sermon at the local chapel. That evening, as the last hints of daylight faded, thick storm clouds began to gather on the horizon. The air grew heavy with anticipation, promising the first genuine rain in weeks. Seated on his creaking porch, Clifford cradled a chipped mug of bitter coffee in calloused hands. He watched the approaching tempest with a mix of relief and stoic satisfaction, as if the change in pressure resonated deep in his arthritic bones. At least the crops will get some much-needed water, he murmured, savoring the final sip before retreating indoors as the first fat droplets splattered on the tin roof. By nightfall, the storm had swelled into a furious downpour. Karma. Rain pounded relentlessly against the window panes, and the wind bellowed through the farmhouse's cracks. Having just settled into his worn, leather armchair with a frayed paperback in hand, Clifford was startled by a sudden interruption. 3 deliberate knocks at the front door. In a land where visitors were a rarity even on clear days, and virtually unheard of amid a raging storm, his heart gave a brief, anxious thump. Setting his book aside, he reached for the old shotgun, stored within arm's reach, not out of fear, but out of the instinctive caution of a man who had learned to depend solely on himself in the isolated wilds. Who's there? Clifford called, his voice echoing against the storm's fury. A strained male voice answered from the other side. Please, sir, I need help. Something in the urgency of those few words compelled Clifford to unbolt the chain latch and opened the door just a crack. Standing on his threshold was a young man, no older than his mid-20s, soaked to the bone. The visitor's cropped, military-style haircut and straight-backed posture hinted at a history of discipline. A smear of mud marred his uniform, and a small cut still oozing a trickle of blood marked his right eyebrow. "Forgive my intrusion, sir," the young man said softly, his voice barely audible over the lashing rain. "My name is Corporal Lucas Reed. I got separated from my unit during a training exercise. My radio's dead, and I've been trekking 4 hours looking for shelter." Clifford's weathered face softened momentarily at the mention of service. The young man's direct, earnest gaze stirred memories of a son he had once lost in combat, overseas many years ago. With a deep, gruff sigh, he unlatched the chain wider. "Come on in, before you catch your death out here." Inside the warmth of the farmhouse, as Corporal Reed stepped over a threshold marked by decades of family history, Clifford couldn't help but notice something unusual. On the young man's jacket was a military patch he didn't recognize, a stylized eagle with markings that evoked a design entirely foreign to Clifford's long military recollections. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his posture relaxing as the warmth of the room began to ease his fatigue. "I can't express my gratitude," Clifford replied. "Let's get you dried off. The bathroom's just down the hall. I'll fetch you some dry clothes and heat up a pot of stew." As Corporal Reed limped down the creaking wooden hallway, mud tracks marking his passage, Clifford felt an inexplicable tug of concern. The mystery of the unknown patch and the soldier's guarded words hinted at secrets too heavy to speak of in the open. In the cramped but cozy bathroom, Clifford gathered a few pieces of clothing he'd long held onto, a few shirts and a pair of trousers once worn by his late son, items he'd never been able to part with. Although they were a size too large for the lean Corporal Reed, they were better than nothing compared to his sodden uniform. Laying them neatly by the door, Clifford returned to the kitchen to warm a can of homemade chicken soup he had prepared the previous autumn. When Lucas emerged, there was a noticeable change, a hint of restored vigor, a spark in his tired eyes, yet the weight of exhaustion still lingered. "Sit down," Clifford instructed, gesturing toward the large oak table, where a bowl of steaming soup and a slab of cornbread awaited. "When was the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning, I believe," Lucas replied, sinking into the chair with a grateful sigh. "I was on a special training mission. Things got complicated." Clifford noted the careful, almost guarded way the young man chose his words. Occasionally, Lucas's gaze flickered to the rain-streaked windows, as though he anticipated an interruption at any moment. "Your unit must be looking for you," Clifford commented gently. Lucas paused mid-spoonful, his eyes shadowed by memories. "They are," he murmured, "but I need to rest a while before I can reach out again." Choosing not to press further, Clifford let the subject lie. After dinner, he led Lucas to the living room, offering the worn but welcoming couch for the night. Placing extra blankets and a modest pillow, Clifford retreated to his bedroom. Though sleep evaded him, memories churned in his mind. Late into the night, a series of soft footsteps and a muted conversation caught Clifford's attention. Rising quietly, he tiptoed toward the living room, the beam of a single lamp slicing through the dim corridor. He could just make out Lucas's silhouette standing by the window. In a hushed tone, the young soldier was speaking into a small, non-standard radio-like device. "Yes, sir, I understand. I'll be ready," Lucas whispered, his voice tight with tension. A reply came, equally low. No one suspects a thing. Just remember, Old Man Barrett is none the wiser. Keep the training exercise story." Clifford's heart pounded as he listened, troubled by the implication that his simple act of kindness might have drawn him into a far more complicated affair than he'd ever imagined. Retreating silently to his room, he lay awake, pondering the mystery unfolding before him. Morning broke with a clear, calm sky, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the previous night. Clifford busied himself with breakfast preparations, yet his mind remained adrift in the shadows of the Stormy events. As he flipped the newspaper, his concentration was shattered by a sharp, insistent knock at the door. Stepping outside, He found a scene he'd never expected. Two black SUVs parked along the gravel drive, and in front of his farmhouse stood four uniformed officers, accompanied by a man in a dark suit, his expression grim. "Good morning, Mr. Barrett," the suited man said briskly, flashing a badge so quickly that Clifford couldn't immediately decipher it. "I'm Agent Mitchell. We're looking for a military deserter who might have passed through this area last night." "Deserter?" Clifford echoed, his tone rising with disbelief. "I haven't seen anyone but the young man who came to my door, injured and disoriented." Agent Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Corporal Lucas Reed, is it? He abandoned his post during a classified operation. He's considered dangerous and possibly in possession of sensitive information." Before Clifford could protest, one of the officers spotted Lucas through a rain-speckled window. "Sir, target located inside." In an instant, chaos erupted. The officers surged into the house, weapons drawn. Lucas, who had barely time to register the commotion, dropped to the floor without resistance. They cuffed him roughly while shouting orders. "Hey, what in the world is going on?" Clifford demanded, his voice trembling with anger and confusion. "That young man came here in need. He's not a criminal." "Stand down, Mr. Barrett," Agent Mitchell warned firmly. "This is a matter of national security. Corporal Reed is not who you think he is." As Clifford watched helplessly, Lucas's eyes met his for a fleeting moment, a look that mingled regret with gratitude. "You're a good man, Mr. Barrett," Lucas managed to say before a forceful shove sent him out the door into the swirling night. With the SUVs roaring away in a dust cloud, Clifford was left on his porch, confusion and simmering anger battling within him. The entire encounter felt wrong, as if a hidden truth lay behind every hurried glance and abrupt command. The young soldier he had sheltered had never struck him as a deserter, but rather as a man in desperate trouble, a man in need of help rather than punishment. For the rest of the day, Clifford's routine tasks blurred into a haze. The memory of that strange insignia, the midnight whisper on the radio, and the rapid, almost rehearsed arrival of the authorities, all of it nagged at him, demanding answers. Determined to find out what had really happened, Clifford visited his longtime friend Frank Douglas, who worked at the local sheriff's office. But to his dismay, Frank's records showed no sign of any federal agents or military personnel conducting an arrest in the county that day. It was as if Corporal Reed had never been taken at all. That evening, while repairing a fence in the north pasture, Clifford heard a deep, rhythmic thudding that grew steadily louder. Shielding his eyes against the glare of the setting sun, he looked up and his breath caught in his throat. Over the horizon, 3 massive military helicopters were approaching his farm. Their dark, angular shapes contrasted sharply with the clear blue sky, and as they drew near, the powerful downdraft from their engines flattened the young wheat in the fields, churning dust and debris into miniature whirlwinds. The sound of the helicopters was deafening. As they hovered low over his property, soldiers in full combat gear began to emerge. A perimeter was quickly established around the landing zone. From the largest helicopter, a tall, imposing figure in a crisp military uniform with ribbons and medals that glinted in the fading light stepped forward. "Mr. Barrett," the officer announced as he strode purposefully toward the farmhouse, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. "I'm General Marcus Langley, of the United States Army Special Operations Command." Clifford straightened, his pasture instincts, honed over decades in rural isolation, now merging with the remnants of military training from his youth. "That's me," he replied cautiously. "What is this all about?" General Langley extended his hand, his tone measured. "I need to speak with you about Corporal Lucas Reed." The general's words carried an authority that made Clifford's heart pound with both apprehension and curiosity. "It appears you brought an impressive show of force just for a conversation," Clifford remarked, half in jest, as he ushered the general and his guards back into the farmhouse. Inside the modest kitchen, now crowded by the presence of uniformed men, Clifford offered them coffee. General Langley accepted a cup with a nod. "Mr. Barrett, I owe you an explanation," the general began gravely. "Corporal Reed is not a deserter. In fact, he's one of our most valued operatives. The events of 3 nights ago, a so-called arrest, were not authorized What happened was part of a covert investigation. Clifford's grip tightened around his coffee mug. Go on, he urged, his voice low yet steady. General Langley continued, laying a thick folder on the kitchen table. Corporal Reed was part of a team tracking a dangerous breach within our own ranks. Intelligence had alerted us to the possibility that classified weapons technology was being funneled to foreign interests by an insider. When Reed's cover was blown during an operation, he separated from his unit to avoid compromising our surveillance. He sought refuge finding you, of all people, in the midst of a raging storm. Clifford absorbed every word slowly, the magnitude of the situation dawning on him. And you mean to say, all those men who took him earlier weren't legitimate? No, Langley replied grimly. They were agents of a rogue element within our own system. The man who introduced himself as Agent Mitchell is, in fact, Major Trevor Harlow, one of the prime suspects in our internal investigation. Clifford's mind raced as he recalled the unfamiliar insignia on Corporal Reed's jacket. The symbol was not of any conventional unit he'd known, but rather a special designation meant to remain hidden from public view. I didn't recognize that patch, he murmured. General Langley nodded. It signifies a special unit. Corporal Reed was exactly who he said he was, a soldier in need. And you, Mr. Barrett, were the only person who offered him shelter without hesitation or judgment. A mixture of relief and pride warmed Clifford's chest even as he processed the gravity of what had transpired. The general leaned in closer, his tone earnest. Your actions that night your integrity and willingness to help a stranger played a direct role in ensuring Corporal Reed's safety. In fact, the intelligence we gathered through his team has led to the arrest of several high-ranking military officers and defense contractors involved in this conspiracy. It's one of the most significant counterintelligence operations we've undertaken in decades. Clifford stared, still slightly dazed by the revelation. So my little act of kindness, it saved lives. General Langley confirmed. Yes, and there's more. After a long pause, the general continued. Corporal Reed's tracking device, a standard part of our operatives. Gear enabled. US to locate and extract him safely. Your help gave him the time and space to activate his emergency beacon. Without you, we might never have known what truly happened that night. Clifford felt a complex surge of emotions, a mix of vindication for trusting his instincts and humility at the realization of how far-reaching one good deed could be. General Langley then explained further details that only deepened the mystery. The information Corporal Reed managed to gather led to uncovering a plot involving not just a few, but 7 high-ranking military officers and 3 prominent defense contractors. The ramifications of this discovery are enormous, and your role, Mr. Barrett, is now part of that success story. Clifford's eyes softened as he remembered the young soldiers' quiet gratitude on that stormy night. Before the conversation could proceed further, the farmhouse door opened once more. This time, Corporal Reed re-entered cleaned up, his uniform now pressed and adorned with several medals. Yet the warmth in his eyes remained unchanged. Good morning, Mr. Barrett, he said, his voice confident and clear. I promised I wouldn't forget your kindness. Without a moment's hesitation, Clifford rose and enveloped the young man in a brief but heartfelt embrace. I'm glad to see you safe, son, he grumbled affectionately. As if rediscovering a long-lost family member, the mood in the room lightened, and General Langley broke the silence. There's one more matter we must discuss. The general gestured for Clifford to sit once again. We would like to invite you to our base for a formal ceremony. Corporal Reed's commendable actions have earned him one of our highest honors, and you should be there to receive recognition for your part in ensuring his safe return. Clifford shifted uneasily. I don't know about all this. I never helped him for any reward, he insisted. General Langley smiled kindly. Your actions were driven by decency and integrity. Nonetheless, we believe in acknowledging good deeds. At that moment, one of the soldiers stepped forward with a sleek leather briefcase and placed it gently on the kitchen table. This is a token of our appreciation, he said. Clifford opened the case gingerly to reveal a neat stack of bills, amounting to $200,000 tax-free. Clifford's eyes widened, but he quickly shook his head. "Keep your money, General. I didn't help him for cash, I helped because it was simply the right thing to do." Corporal Reed interjected. "Exactly, sir. We anticipated you'd say that." General Langley nodded in agreement. "That's why we have an alternative for you, Mr. Barrett." The General's aide retrieved another document from the briefcase and slid it across the table. "We're proposing the establishment of a Veterans Support Initiative in your name, the Clifford Barrett Veterans Assistance Program. This fund will directly assist soldiers transitioning back to civilian life, with special attention given to those in rural communities like ours." Clifford's weathered face broke into a slow smile. "Now that's something I can stand behind." Before Clifford could protest further, Corporal Reed reached into his pocket and produced a small, ornately carved box. Handing it over with reverence, he said, "This is my personal gift to you, sir." Inside the box lay a military challenge coin. On one side was the emblem of his covert unit, a symbol unfamiliar to the public, and, on the other, Clifford's name engraved in bold relief. "It's not customary for us to give these to civilians," Lucas explained, "but today, you are an honorary member of our unit." Clifford turned the coin over in his calloused hands, feeling the solid weight of metal and the even greater weight of its significance. Lucas then added, "There's one more thing you should know. With those helicopters landing on your farm, people in town are bound to ask questions. For security reasons, we can't reveal all the details, but you need a cover story." Clifford considered this for a moment. "Then what should I tell them?" he asked. General Langley offered a wry smile. "How about something along the lines of being recognized for your distinguished military service in Vietnam? We know you've kept a low profile for far too long." Clifford chuckled softly, his modesty evident. "I did serve, but nothing that warrants all this fuss," he admitted. "On the contrary," Langley countered, "your record speaks volumes. In fact, we're here to honor that service and your unwavering integrity." A brief pause followed as the gravity of the moment settled in. "There's one more invitation," Lucas continued, stepping forward once again. "General Langley has authorized me to invite you to our base next month for a formal ceremony. Several of us will be receiving commendations, and it would mean the world to have you there with us." Glancing from Lucas to the General, Clifford sighed and said, "I suppose I could dust off my old uniform for that." The room lightened with laughter and friendly banter, a warmth that belied the earlier tension. Over the next few days, life in the small Texas town took on a surreal quality. Rumors spread like wildfire. A mysterious military visit, secret operations, and a local farmer who had unwittingly become part of a high-stakes national security drama. The local newspaper even ran a front-page story extolling the virtues of a hometown hero, though Clifford deflected questions with the humble reserve of a man unaccustomed to fame. Yet in quiet moments on his porch, as the sky shifted from brilliant blue to warm oranges and deep purples, Clifford would ponder the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed his simple life. One evening, as a dusty mail truck trundled down the long driveway, the driver deposited a small package wrapped in plain brown paper bearing military postmarks. Curious, Clifford retrieved it and discovered a handwritten letter enclosed in a velvet box. The letter, penned in careful, sincere script, began, "Dear Mr. Barrett, by now, I trust the storm has passed and the dust, both literal and metaphorical, has begun to settle. I wanted to reach out to you personally, away from the formality of uniforms and official protocol. That night, you didn't merely offer shelter. You reaffirmed my belief that even in a world where suspicion runs rampant, genuine kindness still endures. You took in a stranger with nothing but your faith in doing what is right. Enclosed is a token from our Missioner Medal awarded for service in the operation that led me to your door. Please accept it not as a military decoration, but as a reminder that your selfless act had far-reaching consequences. Because of you, lives were saved, and hope was restored in ways you might never imagine. I look forward to seeing you at the ceremony next month. Until then, know that your kindness remains an enduring light in our darkest times. With deepest respect and gratitude, Lucas Reed." Clifford held the velvet box carefully and opened it to reveal a crisp, unblemished military medal. The back of the medal bore an inscription, "For the man who saved me when the world turned its back." In that moment, the physical weight of the medal seemed to carry the weight of every life it had touched. Later, as twilight deepened into a star-speckled night, Clifford stepped off his porch and wandered into the fields. The scars of the helicopter landing flattened crops and churned earth reminded him that even the most destructive forces eventually give way to new growth. Life, he mused, always finds a way. In that vast Texas sky, he saw promise that small, compassionate deeds can spark changes larger than any one man's life. With the medal tucked safely in his pocket, he headed back inside, feeling that his lonely farmhouse now brimmed with unexpected purpose. In the days that followed, Clifford slowly embraced his newfound role as an unlikely hero. Invitations to speak at local gatherings, warm greetings from neighbors who once barely knew his name, and a renewed sense of connection to a community that now saw him in a different light all served as reminders that sometimes a single act of kindness can reverberate far beyond what we ever expect. A week after the helicopters had departed, leaving behind only whispers and flattened wheat, Clifford found himself reflecting on his journey as he prepared to drive into town to get his old uniform cleaned and pressed for the upcoming ceremony. He thought back on that stormy night and the man who had knocked on his door. It wasn't just about a military operation or high-stakes espionage. It was about a man who saw another human being in need and chose to help, regardless of the consequences. He realized that sometimes the simplest decisions, the willingness to open one's door, could set off a cascade of events that changed lives. And so, as the cool evening air enveloped him, Clifford sat on his porch once more, gazing up at the infinite tapestry of stars. He understood now that while the world could be dark and filled with uncertainty, small acts of genuine kindness were capable of bringing unexpected light. His heart swelled with a quiet pride, not for the accolades or the financial reward, but for the knowledge that doing the right thing could ripple outwards, touching lives in ways that defied simple explanation. And so, as the cool evening air enveloped him, Clifford sat on his porch once more, gazing up at the infinite tapestry of stars. He understood now that while the world could be dark and filled with uncertainty, small acts of genuine kindness were capable of bringing unexpected light. His heart swelled with a quiet pride, not for the accolades or the financial reward, but for the knowledge that doing the right thing could ripple outwards, touching lives in ways that defied simple explanation. Before closing his eyes at night, Clifford resolved to never again shy away from offering help when it was needed most. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, his choice to see the good in a desperate young soldier had made all the difference. If you believe that true heroism is found in everyday acts of kindness, and if you agree that doing what's right, even when it's inconvenient, can change the course of many lives, then join us on this journey. Click that subscribe button and stay tuned for more incredible stories, where real justice, genuine compassion, and the ripple effects of one simple act of goodness come to life. In today's story, an elderly Texas farmer named Clifford Barrett, who lived a quiet, unassuming life tending to his ancestral land, unexpectedly became intertwined with a top-secret military operation. When Corporal Lucas Reed, a weary soldier on a classified mission, knocked on his door on a stormy night, Clifford offered shelter with no expectation of reward. Yet that one compassionate decision sparked a chain of events that led to the exposure of an insidious conspiracy, the retrieval of a lost operative, and ultimately, the establishment of a veteran assistance fund in Clifford's honor. This tale is a testament to the idea that even in a world filled with suspicion and secrecy, the simple act of extending a helping hand can forge connections that transcend the ordinary. It reminds us that true strength lies not in weapons or force, but in the quiet courage of doing what's right. So, as you ponder the story of Clifford Barrett, remember, sometimes all it takes is one person's belief in the goodness of humanity to illuminate the darkest of nights. Thank you for watching this story of Ancients Hub. If you're inspired to spread kindness in your own life, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more stories that prove that even in our modern world, a compassionate heart can change everything.